Good evening, I'm Ben Morris, and welcome to Circuit News TV. Tonight, we're covering a story that has shaken the geopolitical landscape, a significant and unexpected development in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have launched a major cross-border operation into Russia's Kursk region in what appears to be a bold and calculated escalation in this nearly three-year-long war. Let's break down the events as they've unfolded.
Rain Dentha on August 6, a large Ukrainian force crossed the border into Russia's Kursk region, targeting the small town of Sudzha. This operation, which involved intense shelling and coordinated drone strikes, reportedly resulted in the capture of several villages within Russian territory. The Ukrainian advance was swift and decisive, with scores of Russian soldiers killed, and many others seen surrendering to the advancing forces. The scale of this incursion marks a significant shift in the conflict dynamics. While there have been previous border skirmishes, this operation is far larger, raising new and troubling questions for the Kremlin.
2.5 years into President Putin's war against Ukraine, Russia now faces an unsettling reality: it, too, can be invaded by its neighbor. This reality is one that Russian authorities and citizens alike are struggling to come to terms with, as the implications of this incursion are profound. The Kremlin, which has repeatedly assured the public that the so-called special military operation in Ukraine is proceeding according to plan, is now facing a serious challenge on its own soil. What's particularly notable about this Ukrainian operation is its timing. It coincides with a poignant anniversary in Russian history. 25 years ago this week, Vladimir Putin, who was then the director of the FSB and the secretary of Russia's Security Council, was appointed prime minister. His appointment came just 2 days after a group of Chechen militants launched a bloody cross-border raid into Dagestan.
President Putin, who was 46 at the time, projected an image of a leader who could solve Russia's problems with force and resolve. This image was further bolstered by his infamous promise in September 1999 to beat the living hell out of terrorists, even if he found them in the men's room. His tough stance and the subsequent military campaign in Chechnya helped to propel him to the presidency, which he won easily in March 2000. But today, 25 years later, Putin finds himself in a very different position. Although he still holds power with an iron grip, Russia is now reliving the calamities of the past, only on a much larger scale. The war in Ukraine, which Putin started with the expectation of a quick victory, has turned into a protracted and bloody conflict with no end in sight. And now, for the first time, there has been an incursion into Russian territory that poses a more serious challenge to Putin's regime than anything he faced in the early days of his rule. Local residents in Kursk are understandably shaken and frustrated. Many are asking how this could happen. How could the Russian military, which is supposed to be one of the most powerful in the world, allow such an incursion to take place? These are difficult questions, and so far, the Russian government's response has been less than reassuring. The Kremlin has promised a modest 1,000 ruble compensation to those affected, but that offer has done little to calm the growing sense of unease. The Russian military has responded by sending reinforcements to Kursk in an effort to recapture the lost territory. Airstrikes have been carried out in the region, with guided bombs being dropped on Ukrainian positions. However, these strikes have also hit Russian soil, an ironic twist that has not gone unnoticed. It's a stark reminder that this is not the first time Putin has resorted to bombing his own territory. Back in 1999, his campaign to subdue Chechnya involved brutal airstrikes on Grozny, W.
So, what is Ukraine hoping to achieve with this bold move? Analysts are divided on the exact objectives of the operation. Some suggest that Ukraine might be trying to secure a bargaining chip for future negotiations by holding on to this territory. Others believe the incursion is a strategic distraction, intended to divert Moscow's attention away from the ongoing battles in Donbas, where Russian forces have recently made gains. However, the most likely explanation is that Kyiv is sending a clear message both to its own people and to the Russian leadership. That message is simple: Putin is far from victory in Ukraine, and he can't even ensure the security of his own borders. This incursion into Kursk is a powerful demonstration of Ukraine's resilience and determination, even as the war drags on with no clear resolution in sight. This latest setback for Russia comes in the wake of other recent humiliations, most notably the abortive mutiny by Yevgeny Prigozhin just over a year ago. Prigozhin's march towards Moscow, though it ultimately ended in a retreat, and his likely assassination, exposed deep vulnerabilities within the Russian security apparatus. The ease with which Prigozhin's forces advanced from Rostov-on-Don towards the capital sent shockwaves through the Russian establishment and highlighted the fragile nature of Putin's grip on power. In the aftermath of that mutiny, Putin took steps to reassert control, arresting senior military officers on corruption charges and replacing the long-serving defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, with a civilian technocrat. However, the widely reviled and incompetent chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, remains in his position. Many believe that Gerasimov should bear responsibility for the embarrassing failure to prevent the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. However, in Putin's Russia, loyalty often ranks higher than competence. This isn't the first time that Kursk has been the site of a significant crisis for Putin. In August 2000, just a year after he became prime minister, the Russian submarine K-141 Kursk sank in the Barents Sea after an accidental torpedo explosion, killing all 118 sailors on board. Putin's handling of that disaster was widely criticized, and it was one of the most tumultuous moments of his early presidency. Back then, the Russian media was still relatively free, and Putin faced harsh scrutiny from the press and the public. Today, with the media under tight control and dissent harshly suppressed, Putin is far more insulated from criticism. But even now, as he presides over a faltering war effort and a restless population, the specter of that earlier Kursk disaster lingers in the background, a reminder of the challenges he faced and the ones he faces now.
As the war continues, the situation in Kursk remains tense. Russian forces are trying to regain control of the territory lost to Ukraine, but the conflict has already come home to Russia in a way that was unimaginable just a few years ago. What was once a distant war fought on Ukrainian soil has now crossed into Russian territory, turning Kursk into the latest flashpoint in a conflict that has already claimed so many lives. In the end, this war, which Putin once believed would be a swift and decisive campaign, has become a long, drawn-out struggle. A struggle that has not only devastated Ukraine but is now starting to exact a heavy toll on Russia itself. The lesson, as grim as it is clear, is that the violence Putin unleashed on Ukraine is now coming back to haunt him.
As the war grinds on, the conflict has now come home to Russia, turning Kursk into another flashpoint in a brutal and prolonged struggle. Putin once vowed to beat the living hell out of his enemies, but today, it seems that the tables have turned, as the consequences of his decisions come full circle. And so, 25 years after he first came to power, Vladimir Putin finds himself presiding over a nation that is increasingly uncertain of its future. Russia, once a confident and assertive power, now drifts in darkness, mired in a war that seems to have no end in sight, led by a leader who desperately wants to win but just doesn't know how. Thank you for joining us tonight on Circuit News TV. We'll continue to bring you updates on this developing story as we learn more. I'm Ben Morris. Good night, and stay safe.